I sat alone on the couch, nursing my beer as the dim glow of the TV flickered across the room. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the vibrant home it once was. 15 years of marriage had brought us here, to this lonely silence. Linda and I were living like strangers, sharing a roof but little else. The realization had been creeping up on me for months, but tonight, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Linda had been distant, spending more time with her friends and less with me. At first, I thought it was just a phase, a midlife crisis maybe. But the clues were too obvious to ignore. The late-night phone calls, the secretive texts, and the way she looked at me, like I was a ghost. I decided to confront her, but not with anger. I wanted to understand. As I sat there, memories of our last argument played in my mind. She had said she didn't love me anymore and wanted a divorce. Those words had cut deep, but it was her eyes that haunted me. They were filled with a mix of sadness and resolve, a look that told me she had already moved on in her heart. I took a deep breath and walked to the bedroom. She was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a moment, watching her, trying to remember the woman I fell in love with. The distance between us felt insurmountable. "Linda," I whispered, but she didn't stir. I wanted to wake her, to tell her everything that was on my mind, but I knew it would only lead to another fight. Instead, I turned and left the room, heading for the guest bedroom. It was a small, simple room, but it offered a refuge from the storm that was our marriage. As I lay in bed, I realized that I, too, had fallen out of love. I was holding on to the idea of our marriage, not the reality of it. It was a painful truth, but it was liberating in a way. For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the guest bedroom door creaking open. Linda stood in the doorway, looking puzzled. "Why are you sleeping here?" she asked, her voice a mix of confusion and annoyance. "I stayed up late. Didn't want to disturb you," I replied, sitting up and rubbing my eyes. "That's never stopped you before," she said, crossing her arms. I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment of truth. "Linda, we need to talk." She looked at me, her expression softening a bit. "About what?" "About us. About everything," I said, standing up and walking over to her. "I know things haven't been right for a long time. We're living like strangers." She sighed and looked away. "Frank, I don't know what to say. I feel like I've been screaming into a void." "I know, and I'm sorry. I've been distant too. But we can't keep living like this," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. She pulled away slightly, but didn't leave. "What are you saying, Frank?" "I'm saying that maybe we both need to figure out what we really want," I said softly. "I love you, but I can't keep pretending everything is fine." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." "Neither do I admitted. "But we owe it to ourselves to try and figure it out, even if it means we need some time apart." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Maybe you're right." We stood there in silence, the weight of our words hanging in the air. For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were on the same page, even if that page was filled with uncertainty. "I'll sleep in the guest room for now," I said gently. "Give us both some space to think." Linda didn't argue. She just nodded again and walked out of the room, leaving me to my thoughts. As I lay back down, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. It wasn't the end, but it was a new beginning, a chance to rediscover who we were, both as individuals and as a couple. And with that, I closed my eyes, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning felt heavy. I had barely slept, my mind racing with thoughts about our broken marriage and what the future might hold. I knew we couldn't keep pretending. The confrontation was inevitable. I walked into the kitchen, and there she was, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and confusion. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Morning," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. I knew I had to break it. "Linda, we need to talk," I said finally. She sighed, looking down at her cup. "I know. Last night, it made me realize how far apart we've drifted," I began. "I don't want to fight with you. I just want to understand where we stand." Linda looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Frank, I don't know if there's anything left to understand. We're just not the same people anymore." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right. We're not. But we can't keep ignoring it. We need to figure out what we want, both of us." She bit her lip, looking away. "I don't even know where to start." "Let's start with the truth," I said, leaning forward. "Do you still love me?" She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know. Sometimes I think I do, but then I feel so empty." Her words hit me hard, but I appreciated her honesty. "I feel the same way," I admitted. "I've been holding on to the idea of us, not the reality." Linda wiped her eyes, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and relief. "What do we do now?" I took a deep breath. "Maybe we need some time apart. Not a divorce, not yet. Just some space to figure things out." She nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. I don't want to hurt you anymore, Frank. And I don't want to keep hurting you either," I said gently. "Let's take this time to understand ourselves better. We owe that to each other." The silence that followed was different this time. It was filled with a sense of mutual understanding, even if it was tinged with sadness. We both knew this was necessary. The days that followed were strange. We lived in the same house, but our lives were more separate than ever. I moved my things to the guest room and made an effort to give Linda her space. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the right thing to do. One evening, as I was heading out for a walk, Linda stopped me at the door. "Frank, can we talk for a minute?" she asked, her voice soft. "Sure," I replied, turning to face her. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, "about needing space, and I think you're right. But I also think we need to talk more. Really talk, not just about our problems, but about everything. We need to understand each other again." I nodded. "I agree. We stopped communicating a long time ago. It's time we start." Linda smiled faintly. "I miss the way we used to be. I want to try and find that again, even if it means starting from scratch." I stepped closer, reaching out to take her hand. "We'll figure it out, Linda. One step at a time." She squeezed my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but we were both willing to try. And that was a start. As the days turned into weeks, we made an effort to reconnect. We went for walks together, talked about our days, and slowly began to rebuild the bridge that had crumbled between us. It was a slow process, filled with ups and downs, but it was a journey we were both committed to. And in those moments of connection, I saw glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. The laughter, the shared memories, the understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough for now. Living under the same roof but leading separate lives was harder than I imagined. The house felt colder, the silence heavier. We had agreed to give each other space, but the distance between us felt like a chasm. Days turned into weeks. We communicated through brief conversations, trying to avoid conflict. It was a fragile peace, and I often found myself wondering if we were doing the right thing. One evening, as I sat in the guest room scrolling through my phone, I received a text from an old friend, Jessica. She worked at the same company and had always been friendly, but we hadn't spoken much outside of work. Her message was simple. "Hey Frank, how have you been? Want to grab a drink sometime?" I hesitated, then replied, "Sure, Jessica. Sounds good. How about Friday night?" Friday night arrived, and I found myself nervously straightening my shirt in the mirror. I hadn't been on a date in years. Linda noticed as I headed for the door. "Going out?" she asked, her tone neutral. "Yeah, just meeting an old friend for a drink," I replied. "All right. Have a good time," she said, turning back to her book. The bar was buzzing with the Friday night crowd. I spotted Jessica at a corner table, waving me over. She looked different outside of work, more relaxed, more vibrant. "Hey, Frank." She greeted me with a warm smile. "Hey, Jessica. Thanks for inviting me out," I said, sitting down. "Of course. It's good to see you. How have you been?" she asked, genuinely curious. I sighed. "It's been tough. Linda and I are taking a break, trying to figure things out." Jessica nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry to hear that. Relationships are hard." "Yeah, they are," I agreed. "But enough about me. How have you been?" We spent the evening talking, laughing, and sharing stories. For a few hours, I forgot about the troubles at home. It felt good to be seen and heard again, to connect with someone. As the night ended, Jessica gave me a hug. "Take care, Frank. And if you ever need to talk, I'm here." "Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate it," I said, feeling a warmth that had been missing for a long time. Back at home, I quietly entered the house, trying not to wake Linda. To my surprise, she was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. "You're home late," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of curiosity. "Yeah, lost track of time," I admitted. "Had a good time with Jessica." Linda looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "That's good. You deserve to have fun." "Thanks," I said, unsure of what else to say. As I turned to head to the guest room, Linda's voice stopped me. "Frank, can we talk for a minute?" I turned back, nodding. "Sure." She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened, and I realized that part of why we're in this mess is because we stopped being honest with each other." I sat down across from her. "You're right. We've both been avoiding the truth. I don't want to do that anymore," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I want to be honest, even if it's painful." "Me too," I agreed. "We can't fix anything if we keep hiding." Linda nodded. "So, let's start now. How was your night with Jessica?" "It was nice," I said, choosing my words carefully. "We talked a lot. It felt good to connect with someone." "Good," she said, surprising me. "I'm glad you had a good time. How about you?" I asked. "How have you been feeling?" Linda looked down at her hands, then back at me. "Lonely, confused, but also I've been thinking about what I want, what makes me happy." "And?" I prompted gently. "And I realized that I want to try," she said, her voice firm. "I want to try to fix this, to find a way back to each other." I felt a surge of emotion, a mix of hope and fear. "I want that too, Linda. But it's going to take time. We need to rebuild trust." "I know," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "But I'm willing to try if you are." I squeezed her hand, feeling a flicker of hope. "I'm willing, Linda. Let's take it one step at a time." The separation continued, but now it felt different. We were no longer just drifting apart. We were trying to find our way back to each other. It was a slow, painful process, but it was also filled with moments of genuine connection and understanding. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the little moments of honesty and vulnerability. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but we were trying. And for now, that was enough. Living separately under the same roof was a delicate balance. Each day felt like walking a tightrope, but slowly I began to explore what it meant to rediscover myself. Linda and I had agreed to take this time to understand what we wanted, both individually and as a couple. I started with small changes. I began exercising more, something I had neglected over the years. Early morning runs became my sanctuary, a time to clear my mind and focus on myself. It felt good to take care of my body, to feel strong again. One Saturday morning, after a particularly refreshing run, I decided to stop by a local cafe for breakfast. As I walked in, I noticed a familiar face, Jessica, from work. She was sitting alone, sipping a coffee and reading a book. "Hey, Jessica," I said, walking over to her table. She looked up and smiled. "Frank, what a surprise. Want to join me?" "Sure, I'd love to," I replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down. We chatted about work, our hobbies, and life in general. It felt good to talk to someone outside of the context of my marriage, to share thoughts and ideas without the weight of our problems hanging over us. "You know, Frank," Jessica said after a while, "I think it's great that you're taking this time for yourself. It's important to find out who you are outside of your marriage." "Thanks, Jessica. It's been challenging, but also eye-opening," I admitted. I never realized how much I had lost myself over the years. She nodded. "It's easy to lose track of yourself when you're so focused on someone else. Just remember to be kind to yourself during this process." Her words stuck with me as I headed home. I needed to be kind to myself, to allow myself to grow and change without guilt or regret. At home, Linda was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up as I walked in, a curious expression on her face. "How was your run?" she asked. "It was good. Stopped by a cafe and ran into Jessica," I said casually. Linda raised an eyebrow. "Jessica, huh? You two seem to be spending a lot of time together." I shrugged. "She's a friend. It's nice to talk to someone." Linda nodded, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Jealousy, maybe. "I'm glad you're finding time for yourself, Frank. It's important." "Thanks, Linda. How about you? How have you been spending your time?" I asked, genuinely curious. She sighed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, reading, trying to figure out what makes me happy. It's harder than I thought." "It is," I agreed, "but it's worth it. We need to know ourselves before we can truly understand each other." Linda smiled faintly. "You're right. Maybe we can help each other with that." "I'd like that," I said, feeling a warm sense of connection. Over the next few weeks, Linda and I continued our journey of self-discovery. I joined a local book club, something I'd always wanted to do, but never found the time for. It was refreshing to meet new people, to discuss ideas and stories that inspired me. One evening, as I was getting ready to head out to a book club meeting, Linda stopped me. "Frank," I was thinking, "maybe we could start doing something together. Something new for both of us," she suggested. "Like what?" I asked, intrigued. "There's a cooking class at the community center. I've always wanted to learn how to cook better, and I thought it might be fun to do it together," she said, a hopeful look in her eyes. I smiled. "I think that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it." The cooking class was a revelation. It was more than just learning how to prepare meals. It was about working together, laughing together, and rediscovering the joy of shared experiences. We fumbled through recipes, made a mess in the kitchen, and enjoyed every moment of it. One evening, after a particularly successful attempt at making homemade pasta, we sat down to eat, feeling proud of our efforts. "This is actually pretty good," I said, twirling the pasta on my fork. Linda laughed. "I know, right? Who knew we could cook?" As we ate, I looked across the table at Linda. For the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of the woman I fell in love with. The laughter, the shared connection. It was still there, buried beneath the layers of hurt and misunderstanding. "Linda, I'm glad we're doing this," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Me too, Frank," she replied, squeezing my hand. "It's like we're finding each other again." The exploration phase was about more than just finding ourselves. It was about finding each other, rebuilding the bond that had been frayed over the years. It was a slow, ongoing process, but with each step, we were getting closer to the truth of who we were and what we wanted. And in that journey, I found a renewed sense of hope. For myself, for Linda, and for us. As the weeks turned into months, Linda and I continued to explore our individual interests while finding new ways to connect. The cooking class had been a great start, but we both knew that the real challenge lay in reassessing our relationship and understanding where we stood. One evening, after another successful cooking session, we sat in the living room with our plates. The TV was off, and the only sound was the clinking of silverware. I took a deep breath, feeling the need to address the elephant in the room. "Linda, can we talk about us?" I asked, setting my plate aside. She looked up, a hint of apprehension in her eyes. "Of course, Frank. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about our marriage," I began, "about what went wrong and what we can do to fix it." Linda nodded, putting her plate on the coffee table. "Me too. It's been hard, but I've realized a lot of things. We stopped communicating, Frank. We stopped being honest with each other." "I know," I said. "I think we both got so caught up in our own worlds that we forgot to take care of what we had together." She sighed. "I've been reading a lot about relationships, trying to understand where we went wrong. One thing that stood out to me is how important it is to listen. Really listen, without trying to fix everything right away." I nodded. "That's true. I've been guilty of that, wanting to fix things instead of just listening." Linda reached out and took my hand. "Let's try to change that. Let's really listen to each other, even if it's hard." "Agreed," I said, squeezing her hand. "So, let's start now. What do you need from me, Linda?" She took a deep breath, thinking carefully. "I need to feel valued, Frank. I need to know that my feelings matter to you." I nodded. "I can do that. And I need to feel appreciated, to know that my efforts aren't going unnoticed." Linda smiled. "I can do that too. We both have to work on this, and it's going to take time." "Yes, it will," I agreed. "But I'm willing to put in the effort if you are." "I am, Frank. I really am," she said, her eyes shining with determination. The next few weeks were a period of intense reassessment for both of us. We began to have regular conversations about our feelings, our needs, and our hopes for the future. Some of these conversations were tough, bringing up old wounds and unresolved issues, but they were necessary. One night, as we sat on the porch enjoying the cool evening breeze, Linda brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "Frank, can I ask you something?" she said, looking at the stars. "Anything," I replied, turning to face her. "Do you think we can really make this work? After everything we've been through, do you think we can find our way back to each other?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I took a moment to think, then answered honestly. "I believe we can. It won't be easy, and we'll have to keep working at it every day. But I think we've already made a lot of progress." Linda nodded, a small smile on her lips. "I think so too. I just get scared sometimes, thinking about how much we've changed." "We have changed," I agreed. "But change doesn't have to be a bad thing. We're growing, learning. And as long as we keep moving forward together, I think we'll be okay." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Frank, for believing in us." "Always," I said, squeezing her hand back. "We're in this together." As the days went by, we continued to reassess our relationship. We started setting aside time each week to talk, to reconnect. We went on date nights, rediscovering the joy of being together. We laughed, we cried, and we learned to listen without judgment. One evening, after a particularly heartfelt conversation, Linda turned to me with a look of determination. "Frank, I want us to renew our vows," she said. I was taken aback. "Renew our vows?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I want to make new promises to each other, promises based on who we are now, not who we were." A smile spread across my face. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Linda. Let's do it." And so we began planning a small ceremony. It wasn't about the event itself, but about the commitment we were making to each other, the commitment to keep reassessing, to keep growing, and to keep loving, no matter what. The reassessment phase wasn't just about looking back. It was about looking forward with hope and determination. And as we stood there, ready to renew our vows, I felt a sense of peace and excitement for the future. Because for the first time in a long while, I knew we were on the right path, together. The day of our vow renewal was a bright, sunny Saturday. We kept it simple, inviting only a few close friends and family members. The ceremony was held in our backyard, under the big oak tree where we had shared so many memories. As I stood there, waiting for Linda to join me, I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This wasn't just about renewing our vows. It was about starting fresh, building a stronger foundation for our future. Linda walked towards me, looking beautiful in a simple white dress. She smiled, and I could see the love and determination in her eyes. This was it, the moment we had been working towards. Our friend, Mark, who had known us for years, officiated the ceremony. He began with a few heartfelt words about love, growth, and the importance of commitment. Then, it was time for our vows. Linda went first. She took my hands and looked into my eyes, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Frank, we have been through so much together. We've faced challenges, we've grown apart, but we've also found our way back to each other. Today, I promise to listen to you, to value your feelings, and to appreciate everything you do. I promise to work with you, to grow with you, and to love you for who you are now, and who you will become. I love you, Frank." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I took a deep breath and began my own vows. "Linda, we've had our share of struggles, but through it all, my love for you has only grown stronger. I promise to be honest with you, to communicate openly, and to always support you. I promise to cherish every moment we have together, to celebrate our victories and learn from our challenges. I love you, Linda, more than words can say, and I am committed to building a future with you, one step at a time." Mark smiled and nodded. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Again, you may kiss your bride." We kissed, and our friends and family cheered. It was a simple moment, but it meant everything to us. This was our resolution, our commitment to each other and to our future. The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Linda and I continued to work on our relationship, but now we had a clearer understanding of what we wanted and needed from each other. We made time for weekly date nights, continued our cooking classes, and even started planning little weekend getaways to reconnect. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Linda turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Frank, do you think we'll ever go back to the way things were?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I don't think so. But I don't see that as a bad thing. We're different people now, stronger and more aware. What we have now is better because it's real and hard-earned." She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I agree. I like who we are now." We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. It was a reminder that change could be beautiful, that growth often came from the most challenging times. One weekend, we decided to visit the place where we had spent our honeymoon. It was a small cabin by a lake, a place filled with happy memories. As we walked hand in hand along the shore, I felt a sense of peace and contentment. "Remember our first trip here?" Linda said, laughing. "We got lost for hours because you insisted you knew a shortcut." I chuckled. "Yeah, and we ended up setting up the tent in the dark. But it was worth it. We had so much fun." Linda nodded. "We did. And now we're making new memories." We spent the weekend reminiscing about the past and talking about our hopes for the future. It was a time to reflect on how far we had come and to appreciate the journey we were on together. Back at home, life continued with its usual rhythm, but there was a new sense of harmony. We still had our challenges, but we faced them together, with open hearts and minds. We had learned to communicate better, to listen without judgment, and to support each other in ways we hadn't before. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, Linda turned to me with a thoughtful look. "Frank, do you think we can keep this up? This new way of being?" she asked. I smiled, taking her hand. I believe we can. As long as we keep making the effort, keep being honest, and keep loving each other, we'll be just fine. She squeezed my hand, a smile spreading across her face. I love you, Frank. I love you too, Linda, I replied, pulling her into a hug. As we held each other, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had found our way through the darkness, emerging stronger and more connected than ever. This was our resolution, our promise to each other, and it was something I would cherish forever. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, with love and determination. And that made all the difference.